Today the lesson I have for you is a drawing lesson. It's an exercise that will really help improve your observational skills, and it will also help you understand the importance of using the full range of grey tones from black through to the white of the paper. We're going to draw this glass of water, and to break the exercise down into its simplest form, we're just going to work from a photo at the moment. This automatically flattens the image for you. So therefore it actually makes drawing it easier, better than if we've actually got a physical glass of water in front of us and we have to make that three-dimensional object 2D on the surface. Having the photograph has already done that for us. I've also turned it into black and white, so we don't have to worry about colour at this stage, and we can concentrate on the greys that we're going to be using. Now, our brains tell us that the glass is clear and the water is clear. So if both things are see-through, then how do we go about drawing it? What is there for us to actually see? Well, because of the light that reflects in and around it, highlights and shadows are created. And that's what we're seeing. We see various abstract shapes within the water and the glass, and we see them in this instance with the black and white photograph, we see them in various shades of grey. Now, what we're trying to do with this exercise is to train our eyes to be able to identify these shapes, draw them, and then apply the right level of tone to them to bring the drawing to life. So in order to help you see this a little bit more clearly, I'm just going to move this finished one out of the way a second. You can see here that I've already drawn the basic shape of the glass. So we have the elliptical top of the glass there, and also the top of the water level, and then we have the base of the glass. That's our basic scaffolding. There will be another lesson that I'll do for you on how to draw cylindrical objects and deal with ellipses. But for now, I don't mind if you trace that basic shape or you draw it by hand. It's the shading and looking for these abstract shapes that I'm more concerned about today. So what I've got here is just two sheets of tracing. The first one is showing you that basic structure, that basic overall shape. We have, as I've said, the top of the glass, the top of the water, and the bottom of the glass. And we understand that. We can see that and we know what it is. The thing that I'm asking you to concentrate on today is seeing all of these shapes within the water and within the glass down here. And I've done another tracing here just to show you what those shapes look like in a very hard and outlined form. So these are the shapes that I'm seeing when I look at that photograph. So when I'm looking at that photograph, I'm seeing these abstract shapes, and I'm trying to draw those abstract shapes and place them where they are in the water or the glass into my drawing. And this is the thing that's going to really help you to improve your observational skills, is seeing these shapes, identifying where they are, and then drawing them in. I would suggest that when you do draw these in, you draw them in with a relatively light pencil, so working either a HB, a B or a 2B. And then when we come to increase the tonal values and press on a little bit harder with our pencils for these darker grey tones, then of course we can move up to something. In this case, I'm working with a 5B and ultimately a little bit of a 9B. So as long as you're using a range of your pencils there, you should be able to get this good range of greys that we're seeing in the glass. Okay, so that's what we're going to start with. And as I say, I just thought I would simplify what I'm looking at today by doing these two tracings, one of the basic scaffolding of the glass itself, and then the shapes that I'm looking for within that scaffolding. Also, obviously, we've got there the shapes of the shadow, which if I just show you the photograph again, you can see those shapes behind the glass there. Okay, so let's get started. So just using my 2B at the moment, as I say, that can be HB or a B, doesn't really matter. I'm starting to look for individual shapes. And I'm starting at the top of the glass, only because if I start down here and then I go to work at the top, it's quite likely that the side of my hand will start to smudge those tones and those shapes. So it's really just a practical aspect of working from the top of the glass down. So I'm looking for individual shapes. I'm trying to stop looking at the glass as a whole. I'm looking for different shapes, different tones of grey within there. Perhaps should work from the photograph rather than my finished drawing, really, shouldn't I? Let me just swap that out again so that you can see the actual photograph. There we go. Okay. You'll also notice that I always have the finger of my other hand at the point at which I'm copying the drawing, the photograph. And this helps my eyes go back to the exact spot that I'm working on, rather than if my hand wasn't there, my eyes would be searching for the point on the glass where I'm working. So by having my finger there, my eyes automatically go back to that section. It needs to come down slightly there. Okay. At this stage, I don't need to press on too hard with the pencil, but I do need to identify the lighter and darker areas. So by pressing on a little bit with this 2B, I do start to identify some of those tones. And it's really moving between the range of pencils, as I've just said, and also the amount of pressure that you apply to that pencil that will start to give you your fuller range of greys. Now we can see here on this side of the glass here that we have quite a long elongated patch of shadow. So if it's there and you see it as that shape, then draw it in. Just going to slightly shade that so I can identify it. That rim probably just needs to come over a little bit more now on there. And if I take you back to that outline that we were looking at earlier, this is the elongated shadow that we can see in the photograph. Now our brain would probably just want to continue that edge down all the way to the bottom in an even line of the same tone. And that's because we know the glass to have straight edges. So the brain thinks we need to connect that point to that point evenly. But when we start to concentrate on what the eyes are telling us and try to push the information that the brain is saying a little bit further back in our thought processes, we can then start to identify these different shapes that we're seeing, these different tones that we're seeing. There is another shape here, but it's not as dark as that one. So I don't need to press on quite as much for that one. And also with the top one here, it's quite a straight line both sides, slight soft edge to that. But when we move down to this one here, there's a harder edge to the edge of the glass, but then we get a little bit of tone actually just being pulled into the glass itself. So we're applying that tone, a little bit lighter than that one, and then we're bringing a little bit of that tone into the glass. And it's this attention to detail that's really going to help you to bring this little study to life. So a little bit of tone, lighter tone just on the edge there. So I'm just going to identify that. Okay, so I'm going to move over to this side now. Again, we've got that little outer rim. We've got a little bit more of a darker line that's going to come down from the top there. Okay, I'm going to press on a little harder. It's not quite as dark as that side. So we're comparing those range of tones. We're comparing one tone to the other, seeing which is darker and which is lighter. Again, we've got a little bit of shadow that's coming off that line and into the glass itself. Okay, then I'm just going to pop down now to this top of the water here. As I say, the brain knows that the glass is clear. It also knows that the water is clear. But we're actually seeing something here, aren't we? We're seeing the white of the paper or white. We're seeing a dark tone of grey. We're seeing mid-tones of grey. And that's what we need to concentrate on. We're looking at those tones and what shapes those tones are creating. So here I'm going to go to the darker one. Might be easier to start off with your darker ones first. So you're seeing that dark shape and we're thinking, well, okay, what shape is that? We've got our finger there. So our eyes come directly back to that dark shape and we start to draw it in. Really concentrating on what you're seeing. This is why it's such a good exercise to improve your observational skills. Just going to shade that in a little bit. It's not as dark as it needs to be, but for now, with this 2B, at least I can see that shape. Okay, so there's another shape next to it here. Pressing on, sort of a mid pressure for this one, not too dark. Okay, a little bit lighter now because the tone underneath is a little bit lighter, and then we have a line that comes across here. So if you can see it, pop it in. Another line underneath, slightly heavier with the tone, so slightly more pressure with the pencil, and then we're coming down to this other abstract shape. Looking for these tiny little areas as well of light that's within the darker shapes. So here there's like a tiny little oval that's appearing, which is going to be a little bit of the light hitting the top of the water and giving us a little bit of a lighter reflection. And take your time over this, you don't have to rush it. It's much better to take your time, get absorbed in the exercise. That's where the greatest amount of learning will take place. It's quite relaxing actually, it's quite therapeutic I find to do this sort of shading, building this tone. It's quite light here. Got another little shape there. You don't have to understand what these shapes are. They're all very abstract. So you're just trying to put in place what you're seeing. darker line here that's just the rim of the water. Okay, what I might do now, just bring that 5B in, a little bit more depth to the tone now. So we can really start to use the full range of greys. And we don't limit ourselves to just what we can get out of one pencil. By utilising more than one pencil, we're going to get a fuller range of greys to play with. So increasing that depth of tone, also going to increase that depth of tone there. Just so that I'm not, as I said, working over this area later when I need to reinforce these darks. Drawing things like this is great for your hand and eye coordination. If you've done any of the previous exercises on drawing, the controlling of line exercise, for instance, or the adding shade and tone one, you'll see sort of similarities to what we're doing today. But being able to control the pencil, control the implement that's in your hand, is going to bring you greater success with both your drawing and your painting. Because ultimately we want to be able to control where we put lines and colour and shading to make something realistic for our viewers and people that are looking at our work. Okay, so I've just flicked back to the 2B for now, just to put the top rim in of that glass. And also there's quite a strong highlight, isn't there, on the rim on the other side. So just at the back of there is a tiny little line that's enough just to give us that outer edge. The shade here, which is inside the glass, you can see is a slight shade darker than that highlighted rim. So we need to make sure that we put some shaded tone in here as well. And I would say to just use your lightest pencils for this. As I say, HBB, no heavier than a 2B really. And create some tone within the top part of this rim. I tend to use a diagonal stroke for this, but you can use line strokes that echo the shape of the form. So what I mean by that is that you can actually utilise the pencil just as if you were running it along the edge of the glass, like that. Okay. So we're starting to build up this tone, very light tone that's on the glass itself. Nice and gentle, not a lot of pressure on that pencil itself, just allowing it to rub across the surface of the paper. As we bring that down, that will then help us to leave a highlight that's on the outer edge of where the water is sitting inside the glass. So we're using the paper colour just as we would in watercolour really. We're using the paper colour to give us the very bright white highlights. And there's nothing actually stopping you using multiple shading techniques. I used the one there that was echoing the shape of the form, but I'm just going to increase the tone over here now by using my usual diagonal shading. And as I said previously, there's a little bit of extra tone now that's coming in from this side of the glass here. So I'm just going to increase that a little bit, pressing down slightly heavier on the pencil. And you can see that I'm using the side of the pencil. I'm not tipping it up and using the tip, especially when I'm doing shading in a larger open area. I tend to try and use the flatter side of the pencil as much as I can, rather than use the tip. Using the tip, especially if your pencil is sharp, is likely to dig in and give you a mark that can't easily be rubbed out. Just a little bit of a shade coming down that side there. And you can start to see even now that there's this slight curvature that's happening to the glass because we're slightly deepening down the outer edges. Just increase now pressure on that little bit that we put in earlier. Because we've put this shade in now, we can see that this side needs to go a little darker. And that's starting to help us see the rim that we've got running along that edge. Just popping back to that 5B, just to increase the tone here. And your eyes will soon adjust to the various tones of grey that we're seeing here. You might think initially that you can't see very many shades, but the longer that you look at it, you'll start to see little subtleties and be able then to apply them to your drawing. It's a larger area here. Still got my finger as a guide, helping me to place this tone. Swapping between those two pencils at the moment. If I feel that I need to increase the depth of tone at the end, then I'll bring in a little touches of my 9B, which will really make those dark tones even darker. Okay, so I'm going to continue to put the rest of these abstract marks in, doing exactly what I've just explained to you, identifying shapes, trusting my eyes, popping those shapes in, and then altering the tone of them by changing my pencils or changing the pressure that I'm applying on my pencils to build up the rest of the information in this glass. And I'll come back to you shortly when we look at the next stage. Okay, so that's the majority of the shapes and the shades of tone popped in. And there's two things left to do. Firstly, the shadow. So we're going to look at the shadow in exactly the same way. We're going to try and identify those shapes and then also add the tone in. To help us draw the shadow, we're going to use the side of the glass here as reference points. So you can see on the photograph here that the darkest shape of the shadow enters the side of the glass just underneath that curvature there. So we look at the curvature there, we come down to a similar level, and we know that that's where the start of that shadow, that darker shape of the shadow, is going to start. We're bringing it out in the line, just a slight curvature up. So we're creating that dome, that arc. We're then going to take that arc out at an angle there, and then that joins in with the edge here that hits the bottom of the glass. So that's our first shape in the shadow. Putting this in with the 2B pencil, the lighter of the lighter pencils. Just extending that back a little bit. That's probably a tad too dark there, so I'm just going to lighten that by just a little bit of a putty rubber on there, just to make sure that line isn't too harsh. The thing we've got to think about with the shadows is there's not very many hard lines here. They're all very soft. They're all very, they've got diffused edges, and the putty rubber can help us achieve that, or just soft shading. So again, we're going to just pop the shading in. So we've got that darker tone there, but even within that darker tone shape, there are still slight variations in the greys that we're using. A little bit of a line there to identify the edge of the glass. And you can see here, just on the edge where that dark shape is, if we look into the shadow there, there's a slight line and then another slight line above it. And it's those subtleties that are really going to bring your drawing to life. Identifying those subtleties and then popping them in. Lovely variations in tone. Really building up those hand-eye coordination skills. Go back to the photograph, look at the edge of your glass, and you can see there's the rim of the glass as the shadow, and that's coming out just below that rim there. Slightly raised, so just taking it in a slightly upwards direction. And we're wanting to meet it with this line that's being brought out here. So we've got the end point and the start point over there that we're just going to roughly join in an arc. We've got lighter shading here than we had in that dark shape. We're just going to start to bring that in, and the same this side. And there's a little light bit there you can see on the outer edge of that dark shape. I want to try and keep that. And we've got then 1, 2, 3, 4 arcs that are going round in the top of the glass. We've got the very top one there. We've got a slightly lighter one here, or slightly smaller one I should say. It's about the same tone. Another one in here, all with the lighter pencil, and another one a little bit lower down. And then we're going to continue with that shading over to what we started on the other side. Okay, so that's got the main shape of our shadow in, and now we're going to move to the slightly stronger 5B in my case, but it can be 3, 4, 5, 6B, anything in the middle really, as long as we're getting a variety of those tones. Don't think you've got to use exactly the same pencils as I am. And we're just increasing that tonal quality of the shadow. You can see there, by increasing the shadow, we've suddenly got this nice little highlight on the edge of the glass there. And a little bit of darkness just on these edges. And then if we want to diffuse an edge, just take the putty rubber, tapping very gently on the line so that we don't remove it entirely, we just soften that edge so it appears more shadow-like than it does a hard solid object. And with rubbers and erasers in mind, this is a battery operated eraser. It has removable nibs there, so when obviously those wear out you can replace them, and it's got a little switch on the top that you can just press on. You do have to hold it on, it's not an on-off switch, so you're holding it on while you're using it. But it's because it's got a really, well, this is a new nib, so it's got a nice flat straight edge along there. We can actually use that to lift out some of the graphite and create or bring back our highlights. So I'm just going to turn the paper over of the photograph here, just so that I'm not leaning on what I've done, because I want to bring the highlight back to this rim. Just using it in short bursts like that, and then ideally just use a tissue to wipe the debris of the rubber off your page by using your hands sometimes, because even with the driest, coldest hands, you still have got moisture in your skin and it can very easily smudge your work, so it's better if you do it with a tissue. So I'm going to bring in some of these highlights. If you can see here on the finished one, I'm going to bring those highlights in with the battery operated eraser. So I'm removing the pencil, just like we would if we were using the lifting out technique in watercolour. We're removing bits of the tone. Breaking through that edge will make these highlights more visible. I'm hoping you can hear me over the sound of that eraser. Okay, a little bit here as well, so we get a little bit of a burst on that highlight. Okay, so that's our little study of drawing a glass with water in it. I'm hoping you can see from that how you can identify the abstract shapes within the reflections in the glass and the water, and how by using various pencils and altering your range of tones that you can bring that little study to life and make it look quite realistic on your page. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed that, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.